I met Linda at a friend's barbecue one warm summer evening. She was magnetic dark hair, soft brown eyes that sparkled when she smiled, and a laugh that felt like a melody. She was the kind of woman who could capture the attention of a room without even trying. I was completely out of her league, at least, that's what I thought at the time. I was a simple guy, an engineer by profession, comfortable with spreadsheets and data analysis, not exactly the sort to attract women like Linda. But against all odds, she noticed me. We struck up a conversation, one that lasted the entire night, and before long, we were inseparable. Linda was exciting and unpredictable, and I was stable, logical, maybe even a bit boring. But we fit together, balancing each other out. I remember thinking how lucky I was. Linda was way out of my league, but for some reason, she chose me. We got married 2 years later, and for the first few years, everything was blissful. That's how it always starts, doesn't it? The slow, gentle buildup that convinces you the universe is finally being kind. We had a whirlwind romance, the kind people write songs about. Linda was spontaneous, full of life, and wherever she went, I wanted to follow. Our wedding was a small, intimate affair, just close friends and family, and we took a month-long honeymoon in Europe. We explored Paris, hiked in the Swiss Alps, and drank wine by the canals in Venice. We promised ourselves that we would always keep the adventure alive in our relationship. And for a while, we did. But things began to shift after the birth of our first child, Oliver. Linda changed not all at once, but gradually, like a series of small cracks in a perfect facade. She had been the life of every party, but now there was a sadness that she carried with her, though she tried to hide it. I chalked it up to postpartum depression, something temporary, something we could fix. The late nights, the sleeplessness, the constant needs of a newborn, none of that was easy, especially on Linda. She had always been fiercely independent, but motherhood demanded a different kind of attention, a kind she wasn't ready to give. While I was prepared to share the load, she pulled away. I tried to reassure her, tell her that it was normal to feel overwhelmed, that we would get through it together. She would smile, thank me, but the sadness in her eyes never left. Then she started spending more time away from home. At first, it seemed innocent dinners with her new friends from work, a book club that met once a month, yoga classes on Saturday mornings. I trusted her, of course. She was my wife, the mother of my son. There was no reason not to. But as the months passed, Linda became more and more distant. I noticed how she would always seem distracted, her mind somewhere else, even when she was physically present. Our conversations became shorter, our intimacy faded. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just a phase. Every marriage had its rough patches, right? That all changed one evening. It had been a regular Thursday night. I had put Oliver to bed, and Linda was still out with her friends. I sat on the couch, flipping through channels, when her phone buzzed on the table next to me. I glanced at the screen, a message from someone named Jake. It was brief. Miss you. See you Saturday? My stomach tightened. Who the hell was Jake? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I wasn't about to ignore it either. I knew Linda had met new people at her job, and I had no issue with that. But something about this message, it wasn't right. I picked up her phone and, for the first time in our relationship, I unlocked it. It didn't take long to find the truth. There were messages, hundreds of them. Flirty, intimate, explicit. My hands trembled as I scrolled through their exchanges, my heart pounding harder with every word. The love I thought we had suddenly felt like a lie. They had been meeting for months. And all those girls' nights out? Those were nights she was with him. I felt sick. When Linda got home later that night, I didn't confront her immediately. I couldn't. I didn't know how. Instead, I played along like everything was normal, smiling when she smiled, pretending we were still the happy couple we once were. But inside, something had shifted. A dark, poisonous anger began festering, growing with every passing day. The following days felt like I was living in a fog. Each morning, I'd look at her, wondering if she had any idea that I knew. It's strange how betrayal changes the way you see someone. Every time she laughed at something on her phone, I wondered if it was him. Every time she was late coming home from work, I wondered if they were together. I couldn't focus at my job, and sleep became a distant memory. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction we'd had, searching for signs I might have missed. Over the next few weeks, I watched her closely. I observed how often she smiled at her phone, how she'd make excuses to leave the house. I wanted to confront her, to call her out on her betrayal, but I wasn't ready yet. No, I needed a plan, a way to expose the affair in a way that would leave no doubt, no room for excuses or lies. And then the opportunity came. Linda had mentioned going away for the weekend with some friends, a girls' retreat at a beach house a few hours up the coast. But I knew better. She was going to meet Jake. I decided to follow her. That Saturday, I told her I'd be busy with work, so she left the house without any suspicion. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my keys and followed her car, keeping a safe distance. She drove out of town, heading toward a small, secluded bed and breakfast by the ocean. It was a beautiful place, the kind of romantic getaway we used to dream about before our lives turned into this mess. I parked far enough away to avoid detection and watched as she met Jake in the parking lot. My heart sank watching them embrace, her laughing as he spun her around like something out of a rom-com. It took everything in me not to storm over and punch the guy, but I wasn't ready for that yet. I needed more than just anger. I needed to know why she had done this, why she had chosen him over the life we built together. I rented a room at the same place, but I didn't check in. Instead, I waited. I knew they'd head out for dinner or drinks, and that's when I'd make my move. Sure enough, around 7 that evening, I saw them leave, hand in hand, heading toward a nearby restaurant. Once they were out of sight, I slipped into the room they shared and planted a small recording device under the bed. It wasn't much, but it would give me enough proof to confront her once and for all. I couldn't rely on just photos or text messages. She could spin those any way she wanted. But if I had their voices, their confessions, there'd be no escape. That night, after Linda returned from dinner, I paced around my room, listening to the recording through my phone. Their voices were clear. They laughed, flirted, and then, as I expected, things escalated. Hearing her with another man, listening to the way she spoke to him, it broke something in me. I had been angry before, but now I was livid. I wanted to storm over there, drag Jake out of that bed, and beat him until he regretted ever laying eyes on my wife. But I didn't. I had to be smarter than that. Revenge was no good if it was impulsive. No, I needed to make sure both of them paid for this in a way they wouldn't see coming. I spent the rest of the weekend in that seaside town, following them like a ghost, listening to every lie, every betrayal. When I finally had enough, I drove back home, a pit in my stomach and a fire in my chest. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't eat. I just sat there, thinking of all the ways I could make her feel what she had made me feel. When Linda returned the next day, I waited until Oliver was asleep to confront her. I sat her down at the kitchen table, pulled out my phone, and played the recording. Her face drained of color, her eyes wide with shock. "David," she whispered. Don't," I cut her off. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore." The silence that followed was suffocating. She didn't try to deny it. She didn't try to explain. She just stared at the floor, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make her feel the pain she'd inflicted on me. But I couldn't. I was too tired, too broken. "I'll never forgive you for this," I said, standing up from the table. But for Oliver's sake, I'll stay. And I did. For the next year, we lived in a fragile truce. I watched her like a hawk, every interaction she had, every smile she gave, every glance. She promised it was over with Jake, and maybe it was. But the damage was done. Our marriage had become a shell, something we kept alive for the sake of appearances, for the sake of our son. The worst part of it was that Linda tried to act like nothing had changed. She tried to slip back into the role of doting wife, cooking dinner, planning family outings, and pretending that we could somehow rebuild what had been shattered. But every time she touched me, I recoiled. Every kiss felt like a lie. Every "I love you" felt like an insult. I knew she could sense it, the way I pulled away from her, the way my eyes never lingered on her the way they once did. But she didn't stop trying. One day, about a year later, I came home to find a letter on the kitchen counter. It was from Linda. She had left. There were no excuses, no explanations, just an apology. She wrote that she couldn't live with the guilt anymore, that she needed to figure out who she was without me, that she was lost, and she didn't want to drag me down with her any longer. It hurt. It still hurts. But in some strange way, I'm relieved. The war is over, and I survived. I packed up her things the next day. There wasn't much left of our marriage by that point anyway. We had become roommates who occasionally smiled at each other, but never really connected. I think part of me knew it would end like this. After all, how could we go back to the way things were? Trust, once broken, never fully heals. Now, 3 years later, I've moved on. I have custody of Oliver, and Linda visits on weekends. We don't speak much about the past, and I can tell she's still struggling to find herself. Jake, as far as I know, is long gone from her life. I don't know where she goes or what she does when she's not with Oliver, but it doesn't matter anymore. For me, the scars of betrayal have faded, but they'll always be there. You don't forget something like that. You don't forget the pain of being lied to, the humiliation of being made a fool. But you learn to live with it, to let it shape you into someone stronger. And that's what I've become stronger. For myself, for my son. I may have lost my marriage, but I didn't lose myself.